Hello everyone, this is Robert and this is my xTool P2 laser. So I got this about a year ago, and whenever I do a product review and that thing ends up replacing what I previously had and kind of becomes my primary thing, like this is now my primary CO2 laser, I get a lot of questions in subsequent videos about now that you've had it, what do you like about it, what's changed, can you do a follow-up video? So that's exactly what this is. I'm just doing a follow-up from kind of my initial review because I only had the thing for about a month. Now that I've lived with it for about a year, I have a good and better pros and cons list that I can put together. So that's exactly what I'm going to do in this video, is just kind of tell you how I like it now that I've used it for about a year. And spoiler alert, I really like it, and I think this is probably my favorite CO2 laser I've ever had, and I'm not really looking to switch. I think it's probably the best, for me, CO2 laser on the market right now. And between this and the Cloud Ray Fiber, these are a great combo, and all of my lasering needs have been met. So let's dive right in and talk about the pros and cons of the xTool P2. So before we get into the pros and cons of this machine, there's a little bit of housekeeping that we got to take care of first. As always, feel free to use the chapters to skip around. For this video, I tried to make the chapters something that would be a little bit more interesting if you're trying to actually do research on this machine. Secondly, the kind of legal disclaimer here is initially xTool did provide this machine to me for free. They gave me this for the initial review, so there is that going on. However, for this video, this is all me. They have nothing to do with this video. They're not involved in any way. They're not even aware that I'm making this. I just decided to make it. I was looking back through my old videos for some other reason and saw that this had been almost exactly 1 year, and just decided that maybe it would be a good time to review it again or talk about the pros and cons, because I've had a lot of requests since then, and this is actually a very different laser than what I'm used to using, and I end up really liking it for my shop. So there's that. Lastly, there is an affiliate link down below in the description. If you're at all familiar with how YouTube works and how this kind of relationship goes, if you like this video and end up purchasing the machine and then use that affiliate link, it gives me a commission. That is the exchange for me spending my time on the weekend away from my day job, because I do have a normal 9-to-5 day job during the week, so I'm spending my weekend here to make this video. So that is kind of the trade-off. That being said, no one is forcing you to purchase anything or do anything, and you don't even have to use that affiliate link, but it is there if you want to use it. So let's jump right into how I use a laser in my shop, because I think that's very important when we're looking at the pros and cons. So I think it's important to know how I use this machine, because contrary to what manufacturers are going to try and tell you, there really is no one-size-fits-all machine. There isn't one thing that can do everything perfectly. For me, I use a CO2 laser for prototyping, proof of concepts, jigs, templates, things like that. So for instance, if I'm doing a 3D printing project and I'm trying to interface a part that interfaces with another part, I might use it to kind of test out the whole pattern, test out the fitment, and I'll do that by bringing it into SolidWorks, kind of doing my design, and then bringing it over to the laser, exporting one of the faces, throwing in some cardboard, cutting it out, testing the fit, making some changes, and then when I'm happy with that, sending it over to the 3D printers for the final project. I've also used it a lot with my CNC router, because that's relatively big. If I want to kind of lay something out, my friend was over here maybe a few months ago, and we were cutting out some robot feet, and I wanted to kind of see how everything would line up and where our screw locations would be for the hold downs. Perfect use case to print out a template and kind of have a physical template there to where we could see how everything lined up. I also use it a lot for work, for prototyping different designs. I don't have any images or anything to show you because that's all proprietary and I'm not going to show it here on this channel, but I've done a lot of laser cutting on acrylic for various jigs and various programming fixtures, things like that. So that's kind of how I use it. So I very much value versatility and flexibility because I don't really have a single use for it. I'm not running an Etsy shop. I'm not, engraving tumblers or something for a wedding. I'm not doing production. I'm primarily doing one-off prototyping, and it's kind of a support tool tool for my other engineering projects. So I'm going to start off by talking about the things I like. And the first thing that I like about this machine is just how consolidated it is. If you look at a traditional kind of industrial CO2 laser, you usually have the big old laser, then you're going to have an air assist, then you're going to have an exhaust, and then you're also going to have the water chiller. And I used to have this set up, and I actually did a whole video where I built this stand and integrated the wiring into the machine and, kind of tried to condense it, but it still takes up a fair amount of space. This machine has the riser on it, but if you don't have the riser, it can almost be a benchtop machine. It is a lot smaller, a lot more compact, and at first I kind of thought maybe that was a little bit of a gimmick, but after having it, it is nice that this can kind of sit in a lot more spaces in my shop, if that makes sense. The other one was just really big, took up a lot of room. I kind of sort of had to have it near a door because I was always venting outside. Granted, this I do have a GWick HEPA filter on it. It kind of sits over there. I did a whole video with the hose quick disconnects and whatever. But having this with a HEPA filter is wonderful. It makes just kind of being in the shop with a CO2 laser so much better, and the water pump works fine, the air assist works fine. Everything works exactly how you would expect, but it's all self-contained, all in this nice, sleek package. So I really like that. The next thing that I really like about the P2 is something that came as a bit of a surprise to me, and I don't think I've ever said this sentence before. I really like the included software. The xTool Creative Space, I think it's called, for my purposes actually works out quite well. The big thing that I like is it kind of changes the workflow on how I interact with the laser. Normally with a traditional laser, or what I'm used to, is it works a lot more like a CNC machine, to where you're in some kind of software, you generate the file, and then you kind of have to physically carry the file over to the machine or send it to the machine, then you go to the machine, load it up, and go. And this works a little bit more like a 3D printer, to where you're in the software, you're interacting with the laser wirelessly over Wi-Fi, you kind of do your thing, hit go, and then all you have to do is press that one button to go on the machine. And that workflow actually has worked a lot better for me. I didn't really anticipate that that was a need that I had, but I can be in my office kind of doing all the designing and everything, and all I have to do is come out here, turn this thing on, and then I can just hit go. The camera updates very reliably, very quickly. I've had no issues with the camera feed. The laser recognizes almost instantly over the network. As soon as I turn it on, it's on the network, I can talk to it. So everything works very reliably, very consistently, which is kind of all you can ask for software. The one caveat I will give is I do most of my designing outside of the software. I'm designing everything in SolidWorks, graphics are done outside of it. I don't do a lot of like heavy, intense engraving, things like that. Image manipulation, I'm not really doing that. So all I'm generally doing is bringing things from the outside in, choosing my settings, lining it up with the camera, and then hitting go. And that has all worked out fantastic. And it is a better workflow for me and for what I do. So I really like the software that comes with this thing. Earlier in this video, I talked about how versatility is important to me. And another aspect of the software that I like is it actually comes with a material library. And this is kind of important, and you might not realize this, that if you go on eBay and buy a 60-watt laser and get it home, you're not really going to know how to cut certain materials. So if I grab 3mm acrylic and I want to cut something out of it really quick, I got to kind of figure out what the right settings for that are. And when I got my first CO2 laser, it was like that. So every time I approached a new project and was like, you know what, I want this little acrylic piece, okay, what are the right cut settings for 6mm? Let me get a fresh piece in there. Let me do some test cuts. Okay, yeah, that worked. Let me adjust this. And you kind of have to figure all these things out. xTool has done a really good job of having a not necessarily exhaustive, but a pretty good library of known materials, and they have cut and engrave and score settings already kind of predefined in there. They're not always perfect, but a little bit of adjustment gets them there. Sometimes you might want to slow it down or add a little bit more power, but having them in there at the very least for a starting point is really nice, because for me, this isn't the main thing of the project. It's just a little aspect. I'm working over here and doing one thing and doing something else and making all these various pieces, and I just want to test out a whole pattern really quickly. I don't want to have to remember what those perfect cut settings were for acrylic, or, oh yeah, how does MDF cut again? Let me look back through. I actually kept a notebook for my old CO2 where I could kind of look through it and look at the known value, known good cut settings, and that's really annoying. So having it all in the software is actually a really big help and not something that's very common from other machines. So the last thing that I really like about the P2 was something that I initially didn't like, but kind of had to grow on me. When the G-Wick and the Glowforge all kind of came out, they were using kind of this vision system, they were using cameras, and they didn't really have a control panel, and it was something that took a while to get used to. So with an old traditional or more like industrial CO2 machine, basically what you do is you'd prepare your file, prepare your job, send it over to the laser, and then you would actually take your workpiece, set it down on the bed, and you just kind of have to align it. And I used to use an epilogue way back in the day, and this was the same kind of thing. You just kind of have to line everything up. It would usually have a red dot pointer that would kind of indicate where the head was. You'd hit the frame button, and it would kind of trace out the boundary of what you're cutting, and that's kind of how you do it. You just kind of line everything up. With this, it has the two cameras. So as soon as you close the lid, it's going to take kind of a fisheye view of the whole bed, and that will kind of give you some coarse adjustment. And then if you have some fine details that you're trying to line up, you use the secondary camera and manually take a picture, which is a high resolution kind of detailed photo, and then you can kind of line things up. And doing it this way has been just a game changer for me. It really is so much easier than using the little red dot, because unless you have a red dot that actually goes through the same mirror system, it's not always lined up with the actual laser, so it will be off a little bit. This actually has turned out to be very accurate. The secondary camera is very accurate with the actual cuts that you get. The fisheye is obviously just kind of a general, this is the full bed, but if you do use the secondary camera, it's fantastic. And it also has a focusing feature to where you can click focus. My old laser had just like a hand crank, like literally a hand crank to where you could crank the bed up and down, and that's how you focused. You had a little spacer to kind of crank it up and down. This is really cool. You can just kind of click on something and you're focused to that, and that is fantastic, and that has made this a lot easier to use. If I want to bang something out really quickly, the focus, the camera, and the predefined library has been fantastic. Really like using that. So before I talk about the cons or the things I would like to be a little bit different or better, I think it's worth talking about just kind of the overall performance of the machine. I didn't really talk about this much in the initial review, and I'm not really going to be talking about that much here. And the reason is because all of these machines are going to perform very similarly. It's kind of just the quality of life features that make them better or worse, but in terms of actual cutting or engraving performance, they're all very, very similar. With a CO2 laser, you basically have a CO2 tube at the back that produces a laser beam. It goes through a series of mirrors down into the head, gets focused, and then boom, it does the thing. Some manufacturers will try and tell you that, oh, we can engrave faster, we can do this faster, but there's really not that much truth to that, because the material is really going to dictate how fast you can engrave. If you're engraving something like acrylic, let's say, you can't just up the power and make it go faster, because then you might just start melting it. The feeds and speeds, or the power and the speed that you engrave at, is going to be pretty much dictated by the material that you're actually using. So you can't really go like that slow on cardboard. It will just burn. You can't go that fast on some stones. It just won't leave a mark. So a lot of that is just kind of advertising stuff. But generally speaking, a 55 watt or a 60 watt are going to be very, very similar in what they can do. The big difference is the focal length of the final lens. If you have a very long focal length, you can do better cutting performance. If you have a very short focal length, you can do better engraving. And typically most of the lasers that you're getting are gonna have kind of a better middle point where they're good at engraving and good at cutting. Sometimes the more industrial lasers will be a little bit better at cutting because that's kind of more their focus, but I found that this is very good at the general purpose. It can both engrave really well and it can cut very well. And if you have a specific need for either of those, you can just swap out the lenses to something that is more appropriate for what you're trying to do. But you're going to want to start kind of with a more general purpose machine if you're doing, you know, all sorts of things like I'm doing. So the number one thing I don't like about the P2 is the display. Right here, there's kind of this display underneath the glass, and I really don't find it usable or useful in any way. When you hit go on a job, it has like kind of a little bar graph that shows the progress, but there is no countdown timer. There is nothing on the software. The software just kind of pauses and says working or something like that. And you just gotta kind of wait. Sure, there's a progress meter, but if you're doing like a 15-minute job, I did like a big job a while ago that was maybe like a half an hour. I don't really know the difference between that much and that much. Is it 5 minutes? I don't even know how long the whole job is. You just kind of have to wait for it to be done. And I think that's the biggest gripe I have and the biggest oversight in this whole machine is it could have just had a countdown timer. With 3D printing, CNC machining, and all the other stuff I have out here, I generally know to the second when a machine's going to be finished. With this, it's just kind of experience. I just kind of generally know how long it's going to take. But if it has to go over a line multiple times or it's shading something in, I don't know. You're just kind of watching it like, is this the last pass? Is it almost done? I don't like that about it. And they could have done a lot more with this screen, but I kind of forget that it's even here. It also like displays the temperature of the tube or probably the water in the tube. And I've done really long jobs. And yeah, it raises a couple degrees. Woo, big deal. It's just weird that they have a whole screen under here that really does almost nothing. So the next thing that I don't really like about this machine is if you do anything that's larger than the bed, it gets really fiddly. And I mentioned this in my previous review video linked down below. It hasn't improved. If I need to remove these slats, remove the tray out from underneath here and set something larger inside, it just starts to get a little fiddly and get a little bit complicated. I also have that kind of conveyor system to where you can do a feed through, pass through, which is really slick. I will give them credit, it is a very slick thing. But with where my machine is positioned, I'd have to move it out, turn it 90 degrees, set up some support stands, feed it in and out. It gets really kind of cumbersome and fiddly to start doing stuff like that. And if you're like me, to where you're doing a lot of different projects, and you maybe only do that once every 3 or 4 months, it takes a while to set it up, remember kind of how the software interacts, remember the settings that you got to change. It's something that I don't relish. It's not something that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to use that feature. It's not super intuitive. It's not really easy to set up. And it's something that if you do occasionally is just kind of a pain. However, I do like the bed in this. These little slats are super slick. Really into those. Probably one of my favorite bed materials that I've ever had. The honeycombs are not great, but this kind of removable slat is really slick. I do like that the tray kind of comes out underneath of it. But if I want to do something bigger than the relatively small depth that this has, like I think you can maybe only do about a 1/4 inch thick piece of material up here. Bigger than that, you got to start removing the slats and using, the riser base. Once you start getting into that territory, you got a job ahead of yourself. You got to figure out, kind of what level to put that little tray in and how to get the focus right. It starts becoming a little bit more of a trick. For a traditional CO2 laser, the traditional industrial ones, it has a movable bed that moves up and down. And for those instances, that is much preferred. I do wish it had a movable bed in those instances where I need to cut something that's much larger that doesn't just fit on the slats. It's really fiddly to do anything that's not just standard sheet goods. So the last and final big con that I had for this machine really doesn't impact me, but I definitely think it's worth mentioning because they're always kind of marketing this as, for your Etsy shop or, making stuff for weddings. I kind of keep bringing that up. And I feel like this machine may not be perfectly suited for that in some applications. Let me explain. This machine can't really operate as a standalone machine. You kind of always need to send it a job from the xTool software. So you have to have this on the network, have the software open somewhere, and send it the job. So what you could do is you could just, have all those projects saved in the xTool creative space, and then open up the one that you're going to do, send it over, and hit go perfectly fine. However, a lot of other CO2 lasers have kind of local storage, and they have a screen on the front where you can just select the job and hit go right from there. You don't have to have the computer connected. You don't have to have your laptop. You don't have to have the software open. You can just load it locally on the machine and start cutting it right away. This is really good for a business environment where you kind of want to control the versions of those files. This is exactly how we do it at work. We have one of those machines that has an LCD panel on it, and those jobs are corresponding to the products that we're making. So when you want to make product ABC123, you load up that corresponding file, hit go, and we are in control of those cut files. You don't have to have someone going onto a computer and accidentally nudging something over and messing it up. They're just stored on the machine. So I think that's kind of the big thing that I'm seeing is, once again, with the lack of any kind of interface on this machine, you can't locally store jobs, pull it up, and then run that again. That's not something I run into here in the shop, but I would absolutely not have this for work for that very reason. I would go with more traditional laser that had that control panel that I could locally store those jobs on it. So I think that's pretty much about all I have to say about the machine. Hello to anyone that skipped directly to the conclusion. How are you doing? I think ultimately for me, having a versatile one-off prototyping machine, every single job I do is different and it's one-off, and I'm probably not going to go back to it and repeat it. I'm going to be pulling up random materials to be like, oh, this project I'm going to use MDF, or this project I'm going to use acrylic. Having that material database in there is key. I don't have to rethink about things. I don't have to worry about focusing. Everything's kind of automatic, simple, quick, intuitive, except for when you started getting into the weird edge cases of things that are larger than this build plate or build volume. But for a business environment to where you're doing the same cuts and the same jobs day in and day out, that's something that I'm not sure this machine is really well suited for. I think going to a clunkier, less advanced industrial machine might be the better way to go. If you're space constrained, I think something like this is fantastic. I think this is about the most bang for your buck you're going to get in the space if you have a smaller shop. I still don't really recommend CO2 lasers for an enclosed living space. If you just have this in your office, you always see that in the marketing materials, but man, unless you're directly venting it out the window, you're going to have problems. You're almost always going to smell fumes from these things, just FYI. But for my purposes in the prototyping, I think it's brilliant. I love this machine. Been very happy with it. I like how quick and easy it is just to go in, do the job, get out, and move on to something else and just not think about it. Chillers are annoying. I know I'm just rambling at this point, but having a separate water chiller, they clog, they get blocked, sometimes a communication cable. I had issues with that thing constantly, and we have one at work. Does the same thing. So, having this all in one is actually really, really nice. I've had significantly less issues or zero issues with this one, but with my old setup, I kind of always had to fiddle and mess with it. So that's pretty nice. The last and final thing that we always got to talk about is price. I can't tell you if the price is justified. That's something you got to figure out on your own based on your application. I can say for what they're asking for this machine, it is reasonable given the build quality, given what it can do, given that it's an all-in-one. You can absolutely go on eBay and buy, a 60-watt laser that will shoot out a 60-watt laser beam, but it's going to be a pain in the butt to work with. Trust me, I know, I have one. They're going to be a real pain to work with. They're missing all the bells and whistles. The software is always going to be a pain. You're probably going to have to buy Lightburn. You're going to probably need to get a separate chiller. You're going to need to get a separate exhaust. All of those things are kind of add-ons, and you're going to get up well above the cost of what you paid for it. And then you're going to have a big clunking machine that doesn't have some of the camera features and some of the other stuff. It could be a trade-off that you're willing to make depending on the application, but this isn't priced too much at a premium like the Glowforge, the laughable Glowforge. It's not anything like that. This is definitely within the realm of being reasonable and being a decent value. You just need to make sure if you can justify it for your purposes. If you're just using it kind of occasionally for random prototyping to make like a cardboard jig here and there, like I am, it might be a tough sell. I like having toys around and I like having a laser, so for me, I could justify it, but you just gotta kind of figure out if that's the use that you want for the tool. If you're making money with it, yeah, that's a whole different proposition. So anyway, hopefully that gives you a better idea of my impressions of this machine. I really like it. I've been using it for a year. It's been fantastic. Everything has worked out the way I hoped it would be, and I've been pleasantly surprised by it. So if you have any other questions or comments, please feel free to leave a comment down below. If you want to use the affiliate link, go for it. If you don't, that's perfectly fine too. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.